a black billionaire, walked into the headquarters of the company she built from nothing. No one stood to greet her, no one recognized her face, no one asked her name. She was told to wait in the hallway like a stranger. While inside the glass-walled boardroom, the white men running her empire laughed and talked about power. 6 minutes passed. 6 minutes was all it took for her to realize this was no longer her company. But what they did not know was this. Those 6 minutes had already sealed their fate. What happens when she stands up? Natalie Samuel had not set foot in this building for 5 years. She stood on the sidewalk across the street, looking up at the 40-story tower that bore her name, Samuel Tower. The letters gleamed in brushed steel against the morning sky, a monument to everything she and Randy Webb had built together from nothing. But something was wrong. She could feel it before she even crossed the street. The last time she stood here, Randy was still alive. He was the one who insisted on putting her name on the building, not his. "You're the visionary," he had told her with that easy smile of his. "I'm just the guy who knows how to read a spreadsheet." That was Randy, a white man from Montana who never once made her feel like she did not belong. They had built Nexus Dynamics together, a clean energy technology company that grew from a rented garage in Atlanta to a $12 billion global corporation. And when Randy was diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago, he made her promise one thing. "Let them run it, Ari. Trust the team I built. You've given enough. Go do something for yourself." She kept that promise. After Randy died, she stepped back from daily operations. She remained the majority shareholder with 51% of the company. But she let Jonathan Mercer, the man Randy had groomed as his successor, take the wheel. She focused on her foundation building schools and scholarship programs for underprivileged black children across the country. She traveled, she grieved, she trusted, and now standing here 5 years later, she realized that trust might have been her greatest mistake. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous email had arrived in her personal inbox. No sender name, no signature, just a subject line that read, "They think you forgot." Inside were documents. Financial reports that did not match the ones presented to the board. Internal memos discussing a potential sale of Nexus Dynamics to Vortex Energy, one of the largest oil and gas conglomerates in the world, the same industry that Nexus was built to disrupt. The email ended with a single line, "They think you will never come back. They are wrong." Natalie had spent 2 weeks verifying the documents. Every number checked out. Every signature was authentic. Jonathan Mercer and Richard Hale, the CEO and COO she had trusted with her company, were planning to sell Nexus Dynamics for $3 billion below market value. In exchange, they would receive personal stakes in Vortex worth $200 million. A betrayal so complete, so calculated that it made her chest ache with something beyond anger. She did not announce her visit. She did not call ahead. She simply got on a plane from her home in Martha's Vineyard and flew to Atlanta where it all began. The revolving doors of Samuel Tower pushed cold air against her face as she entered. The lobby was different now, sleeker, more sterile. The warm wooden panels she had chosen 15 years ago were gone, replaced by white marble and glass. And on the walls where her portrait and Randy's once hung side by side, there was only one face now. Jonathan Mercer, smiling, confident, as if he had built this empire himself. Natalie walked to the reception desk. A young white woman with perfect makeup looked up at her with the kind of expression that assessed and dismissed in the same glance. "Can I help you? I'm here for the executive board meeting." The receptionist's eyes traveled down Natalie's body. A simple black suit, no jewelry except a thin gold watch, no designer bag, nothing that screamed wealth or power. The receptionist's lips curved into a polite but distant smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. I'm sorry, but the executive floor requires prior authorization. May I ask who you're here to see?" Before Natalie could answer, another woman appeared from the elevator bank, younger, Latina, sharp eyes and a tablet clutched to her chest. Her name tag read, Elena Vasquez, executive assistant. "Is there a problem?" Elena asked the receptionist. "This woman says she's here for the board meeting, but she doesn't have an appointment." Elena turned to Natalie. There was no recognition in her eyes. Why would there be? Elena had joined the company 2 years ago, long after Natalie had faded from the daily narrative of Nexus Dynamics. To Elena, Natalie was just another middle-aged black woman in a plain suit, probably a vendor or a job candidate who had wandered into the wrong building. "Ma'am, the executive board is in a private session right now. They can't be disturbed. If you'd like to leave your information, someone can get back to you." "I'll wait," Natalie said. Elena hesitated, then gestured toward a row of chairs along the hallway leading to the executive wing. "You can wait over there, but I should tell you it might be a while. They're in an important meeting." Natalie nodded and walked to the chairs. She sat down. The leather was cold against her back. From where she sat, she could see through the glass walls of the main boardroom. 12 men sat around a long table, all white faces, though one at the far end seemed almost invisible, pushed to the edge like an afterthought. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Mercer, his silver hair perfectly styled, his hands moving as he spoke. Beside him was Richard Hale, leaner and harder, the kind of man who smiled only when he was about to take something from someone. On the screen behind them was a logo she recognized, Vortex Energy. The deal was already in motion. Natalie looked at her watch. 1 minute. Employees walked past her without a second glance. Some looked at her, then looked away the way people do when they see someone who does not fit. A black woman sitting alone in the executive hallway. No badge, no escort. Clearly not someone who mattered. 2 minutes, through the glass, she saw Mercer laugh at something Hale said. They were comfortable, relaxed. Men who believed they had won before the game was over. 3 minutes. A memory surfaced unbidden. 15 years ago, this same floor, though it was a different building then. A cramped office they could barely afford. She and Randy sitting on the floor because they had sold the chairs to make payroll. A cold pizza box between them. The future uncertain, but somehow full of possibility. "This company will belong to the people who create value, Ari," Randy had said, his eyes bright with conviction. "Not to skin color, not to gender, to value. And if someone forgets that one day," she had asked. Randy smiled. "Then you'll remind them. That's why I need you. 4 minutes." She wondered what Randy would say if he could see this now. His name erased from the walls. His legacy sold to an oil company. His partner sitting in a hallway, invisible. 5 minutes. Elena Vasquez walked past again, glancing at Natalie with something that might have been pity. Poor woman. Doesn't she know she's wasting her time? Natalie felt the weight of it then. Not just the betrayal, not just the money, but the erasure, the way they had made her disappear from her own story. The way they looked at her and saw nothing worth seeing. The way the world had always looked at women who looked like her. 6 minutes. She stood up. There were 2 paths in front of her. She could leave now, go back to her lawyer, spend months fighting this through legal channels, while Mercer and Hale completed their deal and walked away rich. Or she could walk through that door and remind them who built this company. Natalie Samuel had spent her whole life being underestimated, as a black girl in a school that expected nothing from her, as a young engineer in rooms full of men who talked over her, as a founder who watched investors address every question to her white male partner. She had learned to use that underestimation as a weapon. Let them think you are small, let them think you are weak, and when they are not looking, take back everything they thought they had stolen. She straightened her jacket. She walked toward the boardroom door. Behind the glass, Jonathan Mercer was still talking, still smiling, still believing that this company belonged to him. He had no idea that the woman he had forgotten, the woman he had erased, the woman he had made to wait in the hallway like she was nobody, was about to walk through that door and end his career in less time than it took to drink a cup of coffee. Natalie put her hand on the handle. She thought of Randy. She thought of every black girl who would never get this chance. She thought of the schools her foundation had built, the children who wrote her letters saying she made them believe they could be something. Then she opened the door. The door swung open and every head in the room turned. Jonathan Mercer stopped mid-sentence. His hand, which had been gesturing toward the Vortex Energy logo on the screen, froze in the air. 12 pairs of eyes fixed on the woman standing in the doorway. A black woman in a plain black suit. No badge, no escort, no reason to be here. Richard Hale was the first to speak. His voice carried the sharp edge of a man who was not accustomed to interruptions. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting. Who let you in here?" Natalie did not answer. She stepped into the room and let the door close behind her. Her eyes moved slowly across the faces at the table. Most of them she did not recognize. New hires, Mercer's people. But at the far end of the table, pushed to the margins like a man who had been slowly erased from relevance, she saw someone she remembered. David Mitchell, the general counsel. He had been with the company since the early days. One of the few people who had worked directly with her and Randy. His face had gone pale and his hands gripped the edge of the table, like a man watching a car crash in slow motion. He knows, Natalie thought. He knows exactly who I am. But David Mitchell said nothing. He sat frozen in his chair, his eyes darting between Natalie and Mercer, trapped between the truth and his own survival. Mercer stood up, buttoning his jacket with the practiced calm of a man who believed he controlled every room he entered. "Ma'am, I don't know how you got past security, but this is an executive board meeting. You need to leave immediately." Natalie looked at him, really looked at him. 5 years ago, this man had stood at Randy's funeral and given a speech about legacy and honor and carrying the torch. He had shaken her hand and promised to protect everything they had built. Now he stood in front of her like she was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. "I'll leave when I'm ready," she said. The words landed like a slap. Hale's jaw tightened. Two of the younger executives exchanged confused glances. This was not how people spoke to Jonathan Mercer. This was not how anyone spoke to the men in this room. Elena Vasquez appeared in the doorway, breathless. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mercer. She was waiting in the hallway. I told her you were in a meeting, but she just walked in. I'll call security." "Do that," Hale said without looking at her. But Natalie was already moving. She walked past the row of executives, past the leather chairs and the crystal water glasses and the expensive pens laid out on legal pads no one ever used. She walked directly to the head of the table, where Jonathan Mercer stood with his hand still on the back of his chair. The chair that used to belong to Randy Webb. The chair that before Randy had belonged to her. "That seat," Natalie said, her voice quiet but clear. "Who told you that you could sit in it?" Mercer's composure cracked just for a moment. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before he recovered. "I'm the CEO of this company. I sit where I choose. You're the CEO because I allowed you to be." Natalie pulled the chair out from the table. "This seat belonged to Randy Webb. Before Randy, it belonged to me. And according to the charter I wrote with my own hands 15 years ago, it still belongs to me." She sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. 12 men stared at the black woman who had just taken the chairman's seat like she owned it, because she did. Mercer's face flushed red. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is completely inappropriate. Security is on their way and I suggest you leave before this becomes a legal matter." Natalie folded her hands on the table. "My name is Natalie Samuel. I own 51% of this company. And I have just spent 6 minutes sitting in the hallway of a building that carries my name being treated like I don't belong here." She looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "So let me ask you, gentlemen, who exactly does not belong in this room?" The name hit the room like a bomb. Natalie Samuel, the founder, the legend, the woman whose portrait used to hang in the lobby before Mercer had it quietly removed 3 years ago. Most of the men at this table had never met her in person. She was a ghost, a name on old documents, a face in archived company videos that no one watched anymore. She was not supposed to be real. David Mitchell let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like hours. His hands finally released their grip on the table. The woman he had emailed 3 weeks ago, the woman he had risked his career to contact, was sitting 10 feet away from him. She had come. But Jonathan Mercer was not a man who surrendered easily. He had spent 5 years consolidating power, removing anyone who might challenge him. building a board that answered only to him. He was not going to let one unexpected visitor undo all of that. "Monsieur Samuel," he said, forcing his voice into something resembling calm. "We all respect your history with this company. Your contributions were invaluable. But you stepped away from operational leadership 5 years ago. The board and I have been running Nexus Dynamics since then, and I think our results speak for themselves." Richard Hale nodded, seeing an opening. "With all due respect, Miss Samuel, your role now is that of a shareholder. Shareholders attend the annual meeting. They don't walk into executive sessions and start making demands. Is that so?" Natalie reached into the leather bag she had carried with her. She pulled out a thick folder and laid it on the table. "What is that?" Mercer asked. "Your resignation." Hale let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious. You have no authority to. I have every authority." Natalie opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Article 7, Section 3 of the company charter, the Lazarus Clause. It states that in the event of gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, or actions that fundamentally contradict the founding mission of Nexus Dynamics, the majority shareholder has the right to assume direct operational control, and terminate any member of the executive team immediately, without board approval. The room went cold. Mercer and Hale exchanged a look. The Lazarus Clause. They had heard of it buried somewhere in the original documents, but no one had ever taken it seriously. It was a relic from the early days, something the founders had written when the company was still small enough to fail. It was not supposed to matter anymore. "That clause has never been invoked," Mercer said. "It's probably not even enforceable." "Then let's find out." Natalie pulled out her phone and dialed a number. She put it on speaker and set it on the table. A woman's voice answered. "Office of the Board of Directors. Margaret Collins speaking." "Margaret, this is Natalie Samuel. I am invoking Article 7, Section 3. Authorization Code Randy 0317. 2 seconds of silence." "Confirmed, Miss Samuel. The Lazarus Clause is now active as of 10:47 a.m. All executive authority is temporarily transferred to the majority shareholder until further notice." "Do you need me to send documentation to the legal department?" "Yes, and notify external counsel. I want this airtight within the hour." "Understood. Is there anything else?" "That will be all, Margaret. Thank you." Natalie ended the call and looked at Mercer. The color had drained from his face. Beside him, Richard Hale was gripping the armrests of his chair, like a man feeling the floor give way beneath him. At that moment, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Both were white, middle-aged, with the bored expressions of men just doing their jobs. "Mr. Hale," the first guard said, "you called for security?" Hale pointed at Natalie. "Remove this woman from the building. She's trespassing." The guards hesitated. They looked at the black woman sitting in the chairman's seat, then at the white executives standing around her with panic in their eyes. Something about this situation did not add up. Natalie looked at the guards. "You can stay," she said calmly. "I may need witnesses." She turned back to the table and opened the folder wider, revealing page after page of evidence. Internal memos between Mercer and Hale discussing the Vortex deal. Financial projections showing the company was being deliberately undervalued. Emails confirming the $200 million in personal compensation they would receive once the sale went through. And at the bottom, a transcript of a recorded conversation. "This is from a meeting you held 6 months ago," Natalie said, her finger resting on the transcript. "Just the 2 of you in this building. You thought no one was listening." She read aloud. Quote, "Samuel will never know. She disappeared years ago. We own this company now." End quote. Richard Hale's face twisted. "Where did you get that?" "That recording is illegal. It won't hold up in court." "Maybe not in court," Natalie said, "but it holds up just fine in this room." She looked at the other executives, the men who had sat in silence while their leader sold off a $12 billion company for personal profit. "Did any of you know about this? Did any of you think to ask why we were selling to an oil company? Why we were abandoning everything this company was built to do?" No one answered. Some looked down at the table. Others stared straight ahead, unwilling to meet her eyes. Only David Mitchell looked at her directly, and in his gaze, she saw something that might have been gratitude. Natalie stood up. She placed both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. Jonathan Mercer, Richard Hale, you are both terminated effective immediately for gross violation of fiduciary duty breach of the company charter and conspiracy to defraud shareholders. You will be escorted from this building within the next 30 minutes. Your access to all company systems has already been revoked. If you attempt to remove any documents, files, or proprietary information, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Mercer's voice came out strangled. You can't do this. We have contracts. We have lawyers. This will not stand. Then sue me. Natalie straightened up. But you should know that by the time your lawyers file their first motion, the evidence of your fraud will be on the desk of every financial regulator in this country. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about your $200 million side deal with Vortex. She turned to the rest of the room. Anyone else involved in this scheme should leave now. Those of you who weren't will talk privately. I need to know who in this company still remembers what we're supposed to stand for. David Mitchell stood up from his seat at the end of the table. He walked toward Natalie, passing the stunned faces of his former colleagues, and stopped in front of her. I sent you the email, he said quietly. I didn't know if you would come. Natalie looked at him, this man who had risked everything to do the right thing, who had been pushed to the margins because he refused to play along. You did the right thing, David. That took courage. Mercer and Hale were being led out by the security guards now. Mercer turned at the door, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Samuel. You've been gone for 5 years. You don't know how to run this company anymore. You'll destroy everything. Natalie watched him go. When the door closed behind him, she turned back to the window. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before her. The city where she had started with nothing and built something that was supposed to change the world. 6 minutes in a hallway. That was all it had taken to see how far they had fallen. Now she had to find out if there was still something worth saving. The news broke within the hour. By noon, every financial network in the country was running the same headline. Nexus Dynamics in chaos after founder fires entire executive team. The stock dropped 12% before lunch. Analysts speculated about hostile takeovers, internal collapse, and the death of one of America's most promising clean energy companies. On social media, the story split into 2 camps. Some called Natalie Samuel a hero who had returned to save her company from corrupt leadership. Others called her a reckless outsider who had destroyed a functioning organization out of ego and spite. Inside Samuel Tower, the reality was somewhere in between. Natalie stood in the IT security center on the 32nd floor, watching a team of engineers work frantically at their screens. David Mitchell stood beside her, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He had not left her side since the boardroom. We caught it in time, the lead engineer said, pointing to a cascade of red alerts on his monitor. Someone initiated a mass deletion protocol about 20 minutes ago. Research files, patent documentation, the entire clean energy battery division. If we hadn't locked the system when we did, 5 years of R&D would have been gone. Natalie's jaw tightened. Who initiated it? The authorization came from Richard Hale's account. He must have triggered it remotely before security took his phone. David Mitchell shook his head. He was going to burn it all down rather than let you have it. He was going to sell it. The deletion was probably a fail-safe. If the Vortex deal fell through, he wanted to make sure the technology couldn't be used against them. She turned to the engineer. What about customer data? Someone tried to access client database about 15 minutes ago. External IP address. We blocked it, but they got about 30 seconds of connection time before we cut them off. Enough to download anything? We're still checking, but we've changed all access credentials and put the system in lockdown. Nothing goes in or out without my personal authorization. Natalie nodded. Good. I want a full audit of every file that was accessed, copied, or deleted in the last 6 months. And I want to know everyone who had administrator privileges, not just executives. Everyone. She walked out of the security center and into the hallway. The floor was quiet. Word had spread through the building, and most employees had retreated to their desks, whispering among themselves, refreshing news sites on their phones, wondering if they would still have jobs by the end of the week. Elena Vasquez was waiting by the elevator. She looked different from this morning. The polished confidence was gone, replaced by something more uncertain, more human. "Monsieur Samuel," she said, "I wanted to speak with you if you have a moment." Natalie stopped. She remembered this woman's face from the lobby, the quick assessment, the dismissal, the polite direction to wait in the hallway like she was nobody. "Go ahead." Elena took a breath. "I owe you an apology. This morning when you came in, I didn't know who you were. But that's not really the point, is it? I looked at you and I decided you weren't important. I decided you could wait. I didn't even ask your name." She met Natalie's eyes. "I've been thinking about that all morning, about how many times I've done that to people. Looked at them and decided they didn't matter before I knew anything about them." Natalie studied her for a long moment. This woman was not the enemy. She was a product of the culture that Mercer and Hale had built. A culture where certain people were seen and others were invisible, where power was measured by appearance and assumption. "You weren't wrong because you didn't recognize me," Natalie said. "You were wrong because you looked at me and decided I wasn't worth recognizing. That's the thing you need to change. Not for me, for the next person who walks through that door and doesn't look like what you expect." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand. Good. Because I'm going to need people I can trust. People who are willing to see things differently." Natalie turned toward the elevator. "Are you one of those people?" Elena straightened. "Yes, ma'am, I am." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and damage control. Natalie called the CEO of Vortex Energy directly, a man named William Cross, who had made his fortune buying and dismantling clean energy companies that threatened his oil interests. "The deal with Mercer and Hale is dead," she told him. "And if your company attempts any further contact with Nexus Dynamics employees, or makes any move to acquire our technology through other channels, I will personally ensure that every regulator and journalist in this country knows exactly how you do business." Cross tried to negotiate. He offered to increase the purchase price. He suggested a partnership instead of an acquisition. He even implied that fighting him would be more trouble than it was worth. Natalie ended the call without saying goodbye. By evening, the immediate crisis was contained. The stock had stabilized, though it was still down 8% from the morning. The data breach had been stopped, and the Vortex deal was officially dead. But the harder work was just beginning. Natalie spent the next 3 days meeting with department heads, senior engineers, and longtime employees who remembered what Nexus Dynamics was supposed to be. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions about what had changed under Mercer's leadership, what had been lost, what still remained of the company she and Randy had built. The answers were painful. The mission had been diluted. The focus on clean energy had been quietly deprioritized in favor of more profitable, but less innovative projects. Good people had been pushed out for asking too many questions. The culture of creativity and purpose that had defined the early years had been replaced by politics, hierarchy, and fear. But there were still people who believed. Engineers who had stayed because they loved the work. Managers who had protected their teams from the worst of Mercer's influence. Young employees who had joined because they wanted to change the world and still hoped they could. On the 4th day, Natalie made her decision. She appointed David as interim CEO. He had the institutional knowledge, the legal expertise, and most importantly, the integrity that the company needed. He had risked everything to do the right thing. That was the kind of leader Nexus Dynamics deserved. That night, alone in what had once been Randy's office, Natalie sat in the dark and looked at a photograph she had brought with her from Martha's Vineyard. It showed her and Randy 15 years ago standing in front of the garage where they had started the company. They were both smiling. They had no money, no investors, no guarantee of success, but they had believed in something. I kept my promise, Randy, she said quietly to the photograph. I let them run it. I trusted them. But you also taught me something else. You said that when people forget what matters, it's my job to remind them. She set the photograph on the desk. I kept my promise, Randy, she said quietly to the photograph. I let them run it. I trusted them. But you also taught me something else. You said that when people forget what matters, it's my job to remind them. She set the photograph on the desk, so that's what I did. I reminded them. 1 week later, Natalie stood before 8,000 employees gathered in the main atrium of Samuel Tower. Thousands more watched via live stream from offices around the world. The room was silent. Everyone knew the story by now. The founder who had been forgotten, the executives who had betrayed her, the 6 minutes in the hallway that had changed everything. Natalie looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white and brown, engineers and accountants and salespeople and janitors, the people who actually built this company one day at a time. 1 week ago, she began. I walked into this building for the first time in 5 years. No one recognized me. I was asked to wait in the hallway. For 6 minutes, I sat there, invisible, while the men who were supposed to be leading this company laughed and made deals that would have destroyed everything we built. She let the words settle. 6 minutes is not a long time. But it was long enough for me to understand that this company had forgotten who it was. Nexus Dynamics was not built by people who believed that power belongs to a chosen few. It was built by a white man from Montana and a black woman from Atlanta who had nothing in common except one thing. We believed that value matters more than background, that what you create matters more than what you look like. She thought of Randy, of his easy smile and his absolute conviction that they could change the world. Randy Webb is gone, but that belief does not get to die with him. I am standing here today to tell you that this company does not belong to me. It does not belong to any CEO or board member or shareholder. It belongs to the people who create value, the people who come here every day and work towards something bigger than themselves. She straightened her shoulders. The 6 minutes I spent in that hallway ended an era of false power. Today we begin something new. We go back to what we were supposed to be, a company that exists to make the world better, a company where anyone can belong if they're willing to do the work. The applause started slowly, then built into something that shook the walls of the atrium. Natalie did not smile. She simply nodded and stepped back from the podium. The work was just beginning. 1 month later, the stock had recovered and risen 8% above where it had been before the crisis. David Mitchell was confirmed as the permanent CEO. The leadership team was rebuilt with people chosen for their ability and their integrity, not their connections or their appearance. And in the lobby of Samuel Tower, a new photograph hung on the wall. It showed Natalie Samuel and Randy Webb 15 years ago standing in front of a garage in Atlanta. Beneath it were the words, founded by Natalie Samuel and Randy Webb, 2009. Natalie was walking through the lobby when a young woman stopped in front of the photograph. She was black, maybe 22 years old, wearing a new employee badge. She studied the image for a long moment, then turned and saw Natalie standing nearby. "You're Natalie Samuel," she said. "It was not a question. I am. I read your story. I applied to this company because of you, because of what you did." Natalie looked at this young woman, the next generation, the ones who would carry this forward long after she was gone. Then, make sure that when you're sitting in a leadership chair someday, you never make anyone wait in the hallway the way they made me wait. You see everyone who walks through that door. You ask their name. You treat them like they matter, because they do. The young woman nodded. "I will." Natalie walked toward the elevator. Behind her, the young woman turned back to the photograph, looking at the two founders who had started with nothing and built something that would outlast them both. 6 minutes had changed everything, and the woman who had been made to wait was now the one writing the future.